The bobcat cub. No one wanted, until a homeless man gave him a second chance. He was just a heartbeat no one wanted to hear, a tiny soul left crying in the ashes after the fire took everything. His family, his home, even his chance to live. If stories like this touch your heart, stay with us.
Hang in there,
Subscribe,
little one.
share, or just listen. Because what happens next will remind you why second chances still matter. The fire had swept through the Oregon hills like a living monster, devouring everything in its path. When the smoke cleared, the forest was gone, silent, broken, black. The air still smelled of burnt pine and grief, and somewhere, under a fallen tree, something small moved. A faint sound, no louder than a breath. That's where they found him, a bobcat cub, no bigger than a man's hand. His fur was scorched and patchy, his tiny chest rising just enough to prove he was still alive. They wrapped him in a towel that smelled like smoke, whispering, "Hang in there, little one." They called him the miracle cub, but miracles fade fast in a world short on compassion. The shelter was full, the funds were low, and everyone was tired. He was too wild to tame, too weak to survive. The volunteers fed him when they could, but time and care are luxuries in places built on scarcity. He stopped moving, stopped trying. The world had already turned away. At night, under the flickering light of the shelter, the little cub lay still, eyes half open. Sometimes a faint scratch echoed in the dark. Not panic, just confusion. He didn't understand why no one came for him, why he was still breathing when everything else he loved had burned away. Outside, the rain began again, cold and relentless, washing over the forest that no longer existed. People rebuilt their homes, their fences, their dreams, but not this one small life. And just a few miles away, a man with nothing left walked the same cold streets, a man named Jack. He didn't know it yet, but soon the path of a forgotten man and an unwanted cub would collide. Two lost souls, one searching for warmth, the other for meaning, about to remind the world that love can be found in the ashes. The rain had been falling for days, turning the alleys into rivers of mud and glass. Jack moved slowly through them, his head down, his breath clouding the cold air. The city never looked at men like him. People passed, umbrellas high, eyes fixed on their phones, pretending not to see the figure hunched against the wind. He had long stopped asking for help. When you've been invisible long enough, silence becomes easier than rejection. At night, Jack slept behind an old diner where the kitchen vents spilled a bit of warmth into the air. The cook knew he was there but never said anything. Sometimes, when food was left over, a paper bag would appear on the step. Jack always whispered thanks to no one in particular before eating. It wasn't kindness that kept him alive. It was habit. Survival, after all, is a rhythm you fall into when hope has already left. One morning, as dawn crept between clouds, Jack wandered near the edge of town. The rescue shelter sat there, half hidden behind chain-link fences and the hum of generators. He liked walking past it. The sound of barking dogs and meowing cats was strangely comforting, proof that life still wanted to fight. He stopped near the dumpster, pulled his coat tighter, and bent to pick up a discarded coffee cup. That's when he heard it. A faint cry. Not a dog, not a cat. Something smaller, sharper. It came from behind the dumpster, from a cardboard box soaked through with rain. Jack hesitated. Then the sound came again, weak, desperate. He knelt down and pulled the box open. Inside, wrapped in a filthy towel, was the bobcat cub. Its fur was matted, eyes half closed, breathing uneven. A paper tag clung to the towel, blurred by water, only one word still visible: unfit. Jack stared at it, confused. Someone had thrown it away. "Hey, little guy," he whispered. The cub stirred but didn't move. Jack slid his hands beneath the bundle, careful not to startle it. The body was light, too light, almost hollow. He could feel the trembling through the wet cloth. Instinct made him unzip his coat and press the cub against his chest. Warmth. A heartbeat against a heartbeat. He stood there for a long moment, holding that tiny life as rain poured over both of them. Around him, the city was waking up. Cars passed. No one looked. To everyone else, he was just another man clutching junk in the rain. But to Jack, it felt different. It felt like the first real thing in years. "Don't worry," he murmured, tucking the towel tighter. "I got you." He carried the cub to his spot behind the diner and set it near the vent. The little creature shivered but didn't cry. Jack tore a piece of his sandwich and tried to offer it, but the cub only turned its head. "You're like me, huh?" Jack said softly. "Don't trust nobody." That night, for the first time in years, Jack didn't sleep alone. The cub curled against his chest inside the coat, its tiny paws gripping his shirt as if afraid he might vanish. Every few minutes, Jack would reach down and make sure it was still breathing. Each breath felt like proof that he still mattered to something, even if it was just a dying bobcat no one wanted. When morning came, Jack opened his eyes to find the cub watching him. Its small golden eyes flickered with life, wary but alive. He smiled, slow and uncertain, as if remembering how. "Guess we're stuck with each other now," he said. And for the first time in a long time, those words didn't sound like a curse. Jack named him Rusty. It seemed right. The cub's fur, though patchy and burned at the tips, glowed faintly red under the light from the diner vent. Rusty. A name that felt worn and rough, like both of them. He whispered it once, testing how it sounded, and the cub blinked as if answering. That was enough. Jack spent the day scavenging for scraps. Half a sandwich from a trash can, a bit of chicken from behind the diner, a paper cup of milk someone left behind. He warmed the milk against his chest before letting Rusty lick at it from a bottle cap. The cub's tiny tongue flicked once, then again. Jack laughed, a dry sound that startled even him. "That's it, kid. Don't quit on me now." By nightfall, Rusty was breathing easier. He still trembled, but not from cold anymore. Jack used his coat as a blanket for both of them, curling up against the wall, his hand resting lightly on the cub's side. The rhythmic rise and fall of its breathing became the lullaby he hadn't known he needed. For years, Jack had lived in silence, too tired to dream, too bitter to hope. But that night, he dreamed, not of war or loss or the faces he couldn't forget, but of a small heartbeat pulsing in his hands like a promise. In the following days, something inside him began to change. He started finding reasons to move. He would wake before dawn and search for bits of food or fabric to make a nest for Rusty. When strangers passed, he didn't hide anymore. Some stopped, curious about the tiny animal tucked inside his coat. Children pointed. A few people smiled. Once, someone left a small can of cat food on the steps without a word. For Jack, it was more than charity. It was acknowledgement. For the first time in years, someone had seen him. Rusty, too, began to grow stronger. His eyes cleared, bright gold under the morning sun. He tried to stand, wobbled, then pressed his nose against Jack's palm. Jack laughed again, shaking his head. "You're trouble, you know that?" The cub tilted its head, and for a heartbeat, The empty alley didn't feel like a cage anymore. But the streets were no place for either of them. Rain still came, cold and constant. The city didn't soften just because they had found each other. Some nights were too wet, too loud, too dangerous. Yet no matter how hard it got, Jack never let go. He kept Rusty close, whispering to him like a secret. "You hold on, little guy. We both do." The world didn't notice the man and the bobcat sleeping under a bridge, but if it had, it might have seen something remarkable. Two broken lives, warming each other against the dark. Jack had once believed his story was over, written in loss and silence. But Rusty, in his fragile, stubborn way, had rewritten the ending. He reminded Jack that even a forgotten man could still give love, and that love, once given, could bring something back to life. Under the hum of the city, a bond began to form, quiet, fierce, and impossible to explain. One human, one wild heart, both unwanted, both still breathing. Neither of them knew it yet, but the world was about to find out who they were. And this time, neither of them would be invisible again. Jack didn't remember when he had last spoken to someone for more than a few words. Most days, he just moved, from one alley to the next, one cold morning into another. The city was a blur of noise and motion, but none of it belonged to him. He used to think people were cruel, but over time he learned something harsher. They weren't cruel. They were simply busy surviving their own lives. The streets were gray that morning, damp with mist. Jack's breath came out in clouds as he shuffled past the diner, the one that sometimes left food out by the back door. The cook never said a word, but sometimes there would be a brown paper bag waiting. It was a small mercy, and Jack never forgot it. He took only what he needed, always whispering, "Thank you," to the air. He found an old newspaper and wrapped it around himself as the wind picked up. The headlines meant nothing to him now. Politics, sports, a world that moved on without him. His fingers were numb when he reached into the trash bin for the leftover coffee cup, still half full. He lifted it with both hands, as though it were something sacred. That was when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the city. Not the clatter of bottles, not the hiss of a bus, but a faint cry. High-pitched, fragile. Jack froze, eyes narrowing. The sound came again, from behind the dumpster near the chain-link fence. He took a cautious step forward, his boots sinking into the wet ground. A cardboard box sat there, soaked through with rain. It moved, just barely. Jack knelt down, pushed the soggy flap aside, and what he saw made him forget about the cold. A tiny animal shivering, eyes half open. Fur matted with mud and soot. The smell of smoke still clung to it. He didn't know what it was at first. Too small for a cat, too wild for a kitten. Then he saw the faint spots, the shape of the ears, and he whispered, "Well, I'll be damned. A bobcat." There was a tag tied to the towel it was wrapped in, the ink running from the rain. One word was still visible: unfit. Jack stared at it for a long time, then looked down at the trembling body inside the towel. Unfit, huh? Guess that makes two of us. He hesitated, torn between instinct and pity. The shelter was closed. No one would take the animal now. Leaving it there meant death. Keeping it, well, he didn't even have enough for himself, but the sound it made, soft, broken, barely alive, pulled at something deep inside him that hadn't moved in years. Jack slid his hands beneath the towel, lifting the small body gently. The cub weighed almost nothing. He could feel the tiny heart fluttering like a trapped bird against his palm. For a moment, he just held it there, not sure what to do. Then, almost without thinking, he unzipped his coat and pressed the cub against his chest. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're safe." The warmth of his body seemed to calm it. The trembling slowed, the breathing steadied. Jack stood, tucking the bundle closer as rain began to fall again. He started walking, aimless but determined. For years he had carried nothing but regret and hunger. Now, for the first time, he carried something else, something alive. He found his way back behind the diner, where the kitchen vents pushed out a stream of heat. He crouched there, shielding the cub from the rain. Steam curled around them, soft and white. The cub stirred, gave a faint sound, then went still again. Jack whispered, "You hang on, little one. I got you now." He didn't know it yet, but the moment he picked up that box, his life had already changed. Jack huddled closer to the diner wall, shielding the cub from the wind. The rain had slowed to a whisper, but the air was still sharp enough to bite through his coat. He loosened his grip just enough to peek at the small creature pressed against his chest. Its fur was soaked, its tiny paws stiff from cold. He rubbed them gently between his fingers, trying to give it a little warmth. The kitchen vent hummed above him, spilling out thin waves of heat that felt like kindness. Jack pulled the towel tighter around the cub and set it near the vent, watching the steam rise around them. He had nothing else to give. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. Hunger was an old companion. He had learned to live with it. This little thing in front of him hadn't. He reached into his pocket and found the half sandwich he'd saved from the day before. The bread was soggy, but he tore off a small piece and pressed it near the cub's mouth. Nothing. The animal didn't even open its eyes. Jack sighed. "Too proud, huh? Can't blame you. I've been there." He wrapped the cub again and tucked it back under his coat. Its tiny heartbeat fluttered against his ribs, fast and uneven. He felt it through the layers of fabric, a weak pulse that somehow felt stronger than anything else in his world. He sat like that for hours, rocking slightly, whispering nonsense to a creature that couldn't possibly understand. As dawn approached, the city began to stir. A garbage truck clattered past. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed. The world kept moving, but Jack stayed still. When the first light of morning fell across the alley, he looked down. The cub's chest rose and fell, steady now. He smiled without realizing it. "Guess we both made it through the night," he said quietly. He scavenged what he could for the next few days. The cook behind the diner noticed him sitting there more often and started leaving a cup of milk beside the door. Jack didn't ask why. He just nodded his thanks and poured a few drops into the cap of an old bottle. The cub sniffed it, then licked once, twice. Jack's heart jumped. "There you go, Rusty," he said softly. He didn't know where the name came from. Maybe from the faint reddish color of the cub's fur. Maybe from the way it sounded like something worn but still holding together. Rusty. It fit. Day by day, the rhythm of their lives began to shift. Jack no longer wandered far. He spent his mornings looking for scraps that might fill 2 stomachs instead of 1. He found a cardboard box behind the diner and lined it with torn pieces of an old blanket. At night, he let Rusty sleep inside his coat, close to his heartbeat. Sometimes, in the quiet, he caught himself talking out loud, telling stories, jokes, even singing softly, his voice rough and cracked from years of silence. Rusty began to respond. His eyes opened fully, golden and alert. His movements grew stronger. Once, when Jack returned after being gone longer than usual, the cub gave a tiny growl, a sound that made him laugh for the first time in years. "Easy, tough guy. Didn't think you'd miss me." There were hard days, too. Nights when the rain came down so heavy Jack couldn't sleep. Times when there was no food at all, when he'd give his last bite to Rusty and pretend he wasn't hungry. But through it all, the little bobcat clung to life, and somehow that gave Jack something he hadn't had in a long time, a reason to keep going. The people who passed by began to notice them. Some slowed down, curious. Children pointed and smiled at the sight of the wild-looking cub peeking from the man's coat. A few dropped coins. Others just watched, unsure whether to be afraid or amazed. Jack never asked for anything. He only smiled back, his hand resting gently over the small lump of fur against his chest. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He never had. But for the first time in years, tomorrow didn't seem like something to fear. It felt like a promise. Jack woke before sunrise, the world still wrapped in that thin gray silence that comes before morning. Rusty was curled against his chest, a small ball of warmth breathing softly under his coat. Jack stayed still for a while, staring at the faded sky, listening to the city stretch awake in the distance. The cub shifted, pressing its nose into his shirt, and something inside him softened in a way he hadn't felt in years. He sat up slowly, careful not to wake it. His back ached from the cold pavement, his hands stiff and cracked, but he didn't complain. He hadn't slept this peacefully in a long time. The peace didn't come from comfort. It came from purpose. He had something to care for again. He looked down at the tiny creature and whispered, "You know, Rusty, you're gonna make it. I can feel it." The cub blinked sleepily, stretched one paw across his chest and yawned. Jack smiled. "Yeah, me too." The morning light spilled down the alley, glinting off puddles and trash cans. Jack took it as a sign to move. He stood, tucking Rusty back into his coat, and headed toward the park. The city looked different with the cub in his arms. Softer, kinder. People noticed him now, not the homeless man, not the ghost in the alley, but the man with the wild kitten. A little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve as he passed. "Mom, look, a baby tiger," she said. Her voice was pure wonder, and Jack couldn't help but laugh. The mother smiled politely but didn't stop. Still, for that brief moment, Jack felt visible again. He sat on a bench in the park, pulled his battered guitar from his pack, and strummed the few strings that still worked. His fingers were clumsy, but the melody came anyway. Soft, broken, real. Rusty poked his head out from the coat, ears twitching at the sound. Jack laughed again. "Not a fan of my playing, huh?" he said. The cub tilted its head, eyes bright. People began to gather. Not many, just a handful at first. They tossed coins into the open guitar case. Some filmed on their phones. Rusty became the star without even trying. The sight of a street musician playing to a bobcat cub nestled in his jacket spread faster than Jack could imagine. By evening, someone had uploaded the clip online. He didn't know it then, but their faces, the weathered man and the wild cub, were already beginning to travel across the internet. The caption under the video read, "The homeless man and his bobcat." But for Jack, none of that mattered yet. All he cared about was that Rusty was eating again. The cub had started lapping milk from a bottle cap with small, determined motions, his tiny claws gripping Jack's hand as if holding on for life. "That's it," Jack whispered. You're getting stronger every day." He talked to Rusty constantly now, told him stories from before the war, stories about rivers and trees, about people he used to know. He didn't talk about the dark memories, the ones that came when he closed his eyes, but he didn't need to. Somehow, Rusty seemed to understand. When Jack's voice trembled, the cub would nuzzle closer, pressing his face against Jack's chin as if to say, "I'm here." Nights grew colder. Jack built a small shelter out of cardboard and tarp near the diner, enough to keep the wind away. It wasn't much, but inside, it felt like home. Rusty would curl up against him, his steady breathing filling the silence. Jack would stare at the stars through the gaps in the roof, thinking about how strange it was that in a world full of people, it took a wild animal to make him feel human again. One night, as Rusty slept, Jack whispered, "You saved me. You know that?" He didn't expect an answer, but the cub stirred, opening one golden eye, as if he understood. Jack smiled, his throat tight. "Guess we saved each other." He didn't know what the future held. He still had no house, no money, no plan. But now, he had a reason. And sometimes, a reason is all a man needs. The first winter storm came early that year. It rolled in from the coast, heavy and wet, coating the city in a layer of freezing rain. Jack knew it would be bad the moment he felt the air change. The sky turned to steel, and the wind carried that sharp, metallic smell of snow. He tightened his coat around Rusty, who was tucked inside, peeking out just enough to see the world blur into gray. They had been together for 3 weeks now, long enough for the cub to grow curious and bold. Rusty had started exploring the edges of the alley, batting at leaves and snapping at falling drops of rain. But as the storm deepened, he pressed closer to Jack, small claws catching in the fabric of his coat. "Don't worry, kid," Jack murmured. "We've seen worse." It wasn't true, not for Rusty at least. But Jack said it anyway, because sometimes lies could sound like comfort. That night, the storm hit hard. The cardboard shelter shuddered with every gust of wind. Water dripped through the seams, soaking the blanket Jack had scavenged from a thrift bin. He huddled around Rusty, shielding him with his body. The cub's breathing was steady, but his fur was damp again. Jack tore a piece of his own shirt and used it to dry him, whispering, "You hang in there, little man." By dawn, the city was crusted in ice. The alley glittered like broken glass. Jack's fingers were raw, his lips cracked and blue, but Rusty was alive, and that was enough. He crawled out, found an old coffee can, and used it to melt ice near the vent's warm air. It took an hour before there was enough to drink. He offered some to Rusty, and the cub licked eagerly, his whiskers twitching. Jack smiled weakly. "That's my boy." As days passed, the two settled into a rhythm. Survival turned to routine, and routine turned to something like a life. Jack played guitar when the weather allowed. Rusty would sit beside him, tail flicking, eyes fixed on every movement of Jack's hands. The sound seemed to calm him. Sometimes Jack imagined Rusty understood the songs, how they were stitched together with loss, hope, and a kind of love that couldn't be spoken. People began to recognize them now. The man and the bobcat. Some brought food, a few left money. A woman once dropped a pair of gloves into Jack's guitar case and said softly, "For both of you." He still wore them every day. Rusty grew stronger. His legs steadied. His fur thickened. He still looked wild, but his eyes, those sharp amber eyes, held something softer now. Trust, maybe, or recognition. When Jack spoke, Rusty listened. When Jack laughed, Rusty tilted his head as if the sound mattered. One afternoon, as the sun broke through after days of cold, Rusty climbed from Jack's lap to his shoulder, balancing awkwardly. Jack froze, afraid to move. The cub rubbed his cheek against Jack's face, purring low and rough, almost like gratitude. For a long moment, the world went still. No wind, no noise, just breath and warmth. Jack whispered, "You're something else, kid. You really are." And for the first time in years, those words didn't carry sorrow. They carried faith. By midwinter, the story of the man and his wild cub had already started to move through the city. It began with people who passed by, the diner each morning, the office workers, the kids on their way to school, the regulars who knew Jack only as the guy with the guitar. They would slow down when they saw him sitting near the vent, Rusty tucked against his chest, or sitting proudly beside the open guitar case. Some tossed coins, others just watched. Rusty had grown larger, but he still carried that air of fragility, as if one wrong wind could blow him away. He followed Jack everywhere now. When Jack crossed the street, Rusty trotted at his heel, the end of his tail twitching with every step. The sight made people stop. A bobcat following a man through downtown, too strange to be real, too gentle to be ignored. Phones came out. Pictures were taken. A short clip posted online one evening was enough to spark curiosity far beyond the neighborhood. Jack didn't know any of that. He didn't own a phone, and the world of screens had long since left him behind. All he saw were faces, faces that no longer looked past him. Strangers started bringing food, gloves, even a blanket. A local vet's assistant stopped once and handed him a small bottle of kitten formula. "It's for him," she said, smiling at Rusty. "He's beautiful." Jack wanted to say thank you, but his throat tightened. He hadn't been called lucky or cared for in years, and now it was happening because of a creature that once had no one. At night, after the city quieted, he would sit beneath the overpass, Rusty curled in his lap, and play softly on the guitar. The notes drifted upward, catching on the hum of passing cars. Rusty's ears flicked with every sound, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Jack would talk between songs, about the stars, about old battlefields, about the people he used to love. Rusty listened in that still way animals have, like he was keeping watch over the words themselves. Sometimes, the memories crept back uninvited. The roar of engines, the crack of gunfire, the taste of sand and blood. Jack's hands would shake, his breath shorten, and he'd shut his eyes until it passed. Rusty always knew. The cub would crawl higher on his chest, pressing his head under Jack's chin, a quiet weight that pulled him back to the present. The tremors would fade. Jack would whisper, "It's okay, buddy. We're safe." The weeks turned into months. The park became their second home. Jack learned which trees offered shelter, which benches stayed dry, which shopkeepers didn't mind him sitting nearby. Rusty became part of that map, a living compass guiding him through each day. He'd dart ahead to chase pigeons, then run back, rubbing against Jack's leg before curling up again in his coat. One afternoon, a boy approached while Jack played. "Can I pet him?" he asked. Jack hesitated but nodded. Rusty tensed at first, then relaxed as the boy's small hand brushed his fur. The boy smiled so wide that Jack laughed. For a brief moment, everything around them, the noise, the gray sky, the ache of the city, seemed to disappear. That night, Jack looked down at Rusty sleeping and said, "You did good today." The cub purred, low and steady, the sound filling the hollow spaces of the alley. Jack leaned his head back against the wall, eyes half closed. Guess people don't look through me anymore. They see you first. But somehow, that's enough. He didn't realize yet how far their story had spread, or how many people were quietly following their every move. To him, the world was still small, a stretch of streets, a bench, a song. But somewhere beyond the glow of the city, hearts were beginning to stir for a man and a bobcat who had found each other in the cold. It started with one video. A woman named Claire, a journalist who often passed through that part of town, had stopped one rainy morning when she saw the man and the bobcat sitting beneath the awning of the diner. Jack was playing his guitar softly, the notes barely rising above the hum of traffic. Rusty was beside him, half asleep, one paw resting on Jack's boot. The scene was quiet, ordinary, but something about it made her pause. She filmed for less than a minute, posted it online with the caption, "A homeless man and his wild friend, keeping each other alive." By nightfall, the video had reached hundreds of thousands of views. People called them the miracle pair. Some thought it was fake. Others cried. Comments flooded in, people offering food, money, a home, a job. Jack had no idea. He was asleep under the bridge, one arm wrapped around Rusty, listening to the rhythm of the cubs breathing against his chest. The next morning, everything changed. When Jack walked toward the diner, people were waiting. A man with a camera smiled and said, "Hey, are you the guy with the bobcat?" Jack blinked, confused. "The what?" Another person stepped forward, holding out a coffee. "I saw you online. You and your little buddy." Jack didn't understand at first. Then someone showed him a phone screen, his own face staring back at him, Rusty in his lap, the caption glowing below. He felt dizzy. "That's me?" For a moment, he didn't know what to feel. Embarrassment, disbelief, fear. Rusty pressed close to him, sensing the tension. The crowd wasn't cruel, though. They were kind. A woman placed a warm coat beside him. A boy dropped a few bills in the guitar case. "For Rusty," the boy said shyly. Jack smiled, awkward but grateful. The attention grew with each day. More people came, asking questions, filming, offering help. A local news crew arrived one afternoon, polite but persistent. Jack didn't like the camera. He wasn't used to eyes that wanted something from him. But Claire, the woman who'd posted the video, found him again and sat down beside him. "I didn't mean to make a spectacle," she said quietly. "I just thought people should see you." Jack studied her face. There was no pity there, just sincerity. He nodded slowly. "Guess we've been invisible long enough." Rusty became more restless as the crowds grew. The noise, the flashing lights, the unfamiliar smells. It unsettled him. Jack could feel it in the way the cubs' muscles tensed under his hands. He tried to keep their routine the same. Early mornings, quiet corners, songs when the streets were calm. But there was no going back to anonymity now. One afternoon, as Jack was tuning his guitar, a city officer approached. His tone was calm but official. "Sir, I'm going to need to talk to you about that animal." Jack froze. The officer gestured toward Rusty. "Wild species like that aren't permitted as pets inside city limits. You understand?" Jack's throat tightened. "He's not a pet," he said quietly. "He's my friend." The officer sighed. "I get that, but laws are laws." The words hit harder than Jack expected. He'd spent his life living outside the rules of society. No home, no address, no safety net. But Rusty wasn't part of that world. He deserved more. Still, the thought of losing him felt unbearable. Claire stepped forward. "Please," she said to the officer, "give us time. Let me make some calls." The man hesitated, then nodded. "A day or two. That's all I can do." When he left, Jack sat there for a long time, staring at the ground. Rusty climbed into his lap, pressing close, unaware of what had just happened. Jack stroked the cub's fur, his eyes distant. "They want to take you away," he whispered, "but I won't let them. Not again." That night, as rain fell over the city, Jack stayed awake beside Rusty, thinking of the fire that had once destroyed everything for this little life, and how easily the world could burn it all down again. The next morning, the city felt different. The air carried that uneasy quiet that comes before something breaks. Jack woke early, Rusty still curled against him, unaware of the weight pressing on the man's chest. He sat there for a while, running his fingers through the cub's fur, memorizing every detail. The faint stripes around his ears, the warmth under his palm, the way his whiskers twitched when he dreamed. When Rusty opened his eyes, Jack forced a smile. "Morning, partner." The cub yawned, stretched, then licked Jack's chin before curling closer. It was a simple gesture, but it hit deeper than words. Jack had spent years drifting, convinced the world didn't need him. Now, for the first time, someone did, even if that someone was a creature who couldn't speak. By mid-morning, Claire returned. She carried coffee, 2 sandwiches, and a look Jack recognized, the kind people wear when they're trying to hide bad news. She sat down beside him. "I talked to the wildlife department," she said. "They're not sure what to do yet. Technically, he's a wild bobcat. You can't legally keep him." Jack nodded slowly. He'd expected it, but hearing it out loud still stung. "So that's it?" "Not yet," Claire said. "There's a sanctuary upstate. They rescue animals like him, injured or orphaned bobcats. I called them this morning. If we can get him there safely, they'll take him. But," she hesitated, "you can't stay with him." The words hung in the air like cold rain. Jack's throat tightened. He looked down at Rusty, who was pawing at the guitar strings. "He won't understand," he whispered. "He doesn't know anything but this. But me." Claire's voice softened. "They'll take care of him. And maybe they can help you too. There are programs, housing, work. You could start over." Start over. The phrase sounded impossible. Jack didn't even know where over began. All he knew was the heartbeat under his hand. He exhaled slowly, fighting the ache rising in his chest. "Let me think," he said. That evening, the crowds were thicker than usual. People had heard about the possible separation. Some offered comfort, others outrage. "They can't take him," one woman said. "He belongs with you." Jack wanted to believe that, but deep down he knew the truth. Rusty didn't belong to anyone. He belonged to the wild. When the sun began to set, Jack walked with Rusty to the edge of the park. He sat beneath an old tree, its branches bare against the orange sky. Rusty climbed onto his lap and stared out at the fading light. Jack stroked his back slowly, feeling the steady rhythm of breath. "You know, kid," he murmured, "I used to think I was done, thought life had already had its say. Then you showed up, shaking in a box behind a dumpster, and suddenly I wasn't invisible anymore." He paused, his voice rough. "You gave me something I didn't know I needed. A reason to wake up." Rusty pressed his head against Jack's chest, a low rumble vibrating through his small body. Jack closed his eyes. "Whatever happens, you remember this, all right? You weren't unwanted. You were loved. They stayed like that until the last bit of light disappeared. Jack didn't cry. Not because he wasn't sad, but because the moment felt sacred, too whole for tears. Somewhere deep down, he understood that love wasn't about keeping. It was about giving, about letting something broken find its way back to where it belongs. The next day, Claire returned with the sanctuary truck. The officers stood back, respectful. Jack held Rusty one last time, whispering something only the cub could hear. Rusty nuzzled his chin, then looked up at him. Calm, trusting, unafraid. Jack placed him gently into the carrier, his fingers lingering on the door before it closed. As the truck pulled away, Jack stood in the rain, watching until it vanished around the corner. For a long time, he didn't move. The city was loud again, alive and indifferent. But something in him stayed still, like a candle flickering after the wind has gone. He turned, lifted his guitar, and whispered, "See you, partner." When he began to play, the melody carried far beyond the alley, soft and raw, a song of loss, of love, and of the bond that no distance could break. Jack hadn't been inside a building in years. When he stepped through the doors of the wildlife facility 2 days later, the fluorescent lights felt too bright, too sterile. The air smelled like antiseptic and metal. Rusty was somewhere in the back, behind a wall of glass and rules. Jack stood still, holding his hat in both hands, like a man entering a church he didn't belong to. Claire had done everything she could. She'd talked to the officers, pleaded with the center director, even brought letters from people who'd seen the videos online. "Let him visit," she'd said. "He's the only family that animal has ever known." They'd agreed to one supervised meeting. Just one. When Jack saw Rusty again, the cub was pacing inside a clean enclosure. Safer, warmer, but wrong. The concrete floor gleamed under the white lights. A plastic branch sat in one corner, too smooth to ever be real. Rusty turned his head at the sound of footsteps. The moment he saw Jack, he froze. His tail flicked once, then twice, and then, with a low cry that echoed off the glass, he leapt toward him. Jack pressed his hands against the barrier. "Hey there, buddy," his voice cracked. "You remember me, don't you?" Rusty rubbed his face against the glass, searching for a scent that wasn't there. The sound that came out of him was half growl, half cry, confusion mixed with longing. Jack laughed through tears. "You're okay now. They're gonna take care of you." But even as he said it, he saw the restlessness in Rusty's eyes, the same look he'd had that first night in the alley, the look of something wild that had learned to love a world that wouldn't let it stay. A worker cleared her throat gently. "Sir, I'm sorry. We can't let you touch him." Jack nodded, wiping at his face. Yeah, I get it." He leaned closer, whispering to the glass. "You're stronger than me, kid. You always were." When he turned to leave, Rusty clawed at the glass, his cries sharp and desperate. Jack stopped, his back trembling, then forced himself to keep walking. Each step away felt heavier than the last. Outside, Claire was waiting. Her eyes said everything before her words did. "I'm so sorry, Jack." He nodded slowly, voice low. "He's safe. That's what matters." But as the door closed behind him, the sound that lingered wasn't safety. It was loss. Pure, clean, unbearable. That night, back under the bridge, Jack couldn't sleep. He still felt the weight of Rusty's paw against his chest, still heard the cry that had followed him out the door. For the first time in months, the world felt empty again. He picked up his guitar, but the strings refused to sing. The city was silent, and so was he. Claire returned the next morning, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She found Jack sitting by the bridge, the guitar across his knees, his gaze fixed on the river below. The city roared above them, horns, footsteps, life moving on. But down there it was quiet, a different world entirely. "They're keeping him under observation," she said gently. "He's healthy, eating well. They'll move him to the sanctuary soon." Jack nodded but didn't look up. "He doesn't understand why I left." Claire crouched beside him. "He will, in time." Jack shook his head slowly. "Animals don't think in time. They think in trust." There was nothing she could say to that. For hours he sat there, barely moving. Every sound, a car horn, a seagull's cry, reminded him of Rusty's voice behind the glass. He'd spent years building walls to keep the world out, and somehow a small wild creature had torn them down in weeks. Now the silence felt heavier than any hunger he'd ever known. That night, the world changed again. This time without his permission. Claire's video of their reunion had gone viral, the moment when Rusty leapt toward the glass, the way Jack whispered, "You're stronger than me." It spread faster than wildfire. Millions watched. The hashtag #OrangeSaveRusty appeared everywhere. On news posts, message boards, even television, people demanded answers. Why separate them? Why punish kindness? Messages poured into Claire's inbox from all over the country. Offers of help, donations, petitions. Someone created a fundraiser for Jack and Rusty. Within hours, it had more money than either of them had ever seen. But Jack didn't know any of it. He didn't have a phone. He didn't see the screens lighting up with his story. He only saw the space beside him, empty now, except for the memory of a heartbeat. When Claire told him, he just stared at her. "They care about us?" "About both of you," she said. "You've touched people. They want to help." Jack smiled faintly, disbelief softening into something like awe. "Guess the world isn't as cold as I thought." Claire nodded. "They're listening, Jack. They're talking about letting you work at the sanctuary, as Rusty's caretaker." The words hit him like sunlight after a long winter. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "Me? Work there?" "It's not official yet, but people are fighting for it. They saw how he looked at you, how you looked at him. They know you belong together." Jack's throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes when the time comes," Claire said, smiling. That night, for the first time since Rusty had been taken, Jack lit a small fire near the bridge. He warmed his hands, staring into the flames. It wasn't the same without the cub curled against him, but the warmth felt different. Not borrowed, not pitied, but earned. The world beyond the river was finally reaching back. He picked up his guitar and began to play, softly at first, then stronger, his voice low but clear. "You were born in fire, and I was burned too. Maybe that's why we fit. Ashes finding ashes till something new grew." The song floated across the water, a promise in every note. Somewhere out there, a small bobcat slept under clean sheets, his heartbeat steady and safe. Jack didn't know if Rusty could still hear him, but he sang anyway. By the end of that week, the story had reached every corner of the country. News anchors spoke his name with quiet reverence. Jack Thompson, the homeless veteran who saved a bobcat. Talk shows played clips of him singing by the bridge, the cub nestled against his chest. Headlines called them two lost souls who found each other. For once, Jack's story wasn't about what he'd lost. It was about what he'd saved. Claire became his bridge to the outside world. Every day she brought updates, scrolling through comments and messages on her phone. "People are still donating," she told him. "They're writing songs, painting murals, even sending letters to the sanctuary, asking for you to be part of his care." Jack would listen in silence, a mix of disbelief and gratitude softening the hard lines on his face. "All this," he said once, "for a scruffy guy and a scared little cat." "Not a cat," Claire corrected gently. "A miracle." Still, beneath the growing attention, a quiet dread gnawed at him. He knew how stories worked. The world loved a symbol, loved to lift people up just to watch them fall. Fame didn't belong to men like him. He'd seen how quickly pity could turn to spectacle. But then came the call. Claire was with him when her phone rang. She listened, eyes wide, then handed it to Jack. "It's the sanctuary director," she whispered. A man's calm voice filled the line. "Mr. Thompson, we've been following what's happening. We'd like to offer you a position here. Temporary at first. We believe Rusty would do better with you around." Jack couldn't speak for several seconds. The noise of traffic, the rush of the river, the beat of his own heart, all of it faded. "You want me to work there?" "Yes, as his caretaker. If you agree, we'll arrange transportation tomorrow." Jack swallowed hard. "I'll be there." When he hung up, Claire grinned. "You did it." He laughed, a raw, startled sound. "No," he said softly. "We did." That night he couldn't sleep. Excitement and fear tangled inside him. He lay beneath the bridge, staring at the faint glow of the city above, thinking about everything that had brought him here. The fire, the alley, the rain, the box, that heartbeat against his chest. Tomorrow, he'd see Rusty again. The thought filled him with warmth and terror all at once. He rose before dawn, packing the few things he owned: his guitar, his coat, and a small piece of cardboard torn from their old shelter. On it, in faded ink, he'd written one word weeks ago: home. Claire met him at the station. He wore a donated jacket, still stiff from the store. It felt strange on him, heavy with someone else's kindness. "You nervous?" she asked. Jack smiled, his hands tightening on the guitar case. "I've faced worse." The ride north was long. Trees replaced buildings. The air grew clean and sharp. When the car finally turned down a gravel road lined with pines, Jack felt his pulse quicken. Ahead, through the mist, stood the sanctuary. Acres of green fenced land, quiet and open. A place built not for cages, but for healing. He stepped out, his boots sinking into wet earth. A staff member greeted him, kind-eyed and calm. "We're glad you're here, Jack. Rusty's been restless since he arrived. Maybe he's been waiting for you." Jack didn't answer. He just nodded, following them toward the enclosure at the far end of the field, where the morning sun spilled gold over the wire. Somewhere inside, a familiar sound stirred, a soft, wild cry that stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't just memory. It was recognition. Jack followed the sound, his steps slow, almost afraid to hope. The staff member opened the gate to a viewing corridor that ran along the side of the enclosure. "He's through there," she said quietly. "Take your time." The path smelled of pine and damp earth. On the far side, behind a stretch of mesh and open space, Rusty was pacing, leaner and stronger than Jack remembered. His coat gleamed under the sunlight, thick and bright, the color of autumn leaves. When he turned, their eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Rusty froze, his ears twitching, his muscles coiling. "Hey there, partner," Jack said softly. His voice trembled. "You didn't forget me, did you?" The cub's head tilted, confused, the faintest sound slipping from his throat. Not a growl, not a cry, something in between. Jack stepped closer to the fence. "It's okay, Rusty. You're safe." A low rumble came from Rusty's chest, deep and familiar. Then, like a spring snapping loose, he bounded forward. The staff tensed, but Jack raised a hand. Rusty skidded to a stop at the fence, pressing his body against the wire, pawing at the air between them. Jack dropped to his knees, pressing his palms against the metal. "That's it," he whispered. "I'm right here." For a long moment, they stayed that way. Two survivors on opposite sides of a thin line, breathing the same air, each grounding the other. Jack's eyes blurred. "You grew up, kid," he said. "Guess we both did." The staff let them stay like that until the sun slipped lower. Then one of the handlers approached. "We think he's calm enough to try contact," she said. "But if he shows stress, we stop. Understood?" Jack nodded, unable to speak. They opened a side gate leading into Zuku, a smaller pen. Rusty's gaze never left him as he stepped inside. The world fell silent. Even the birds seemed to pause. Jack knelt, his hands open, steady. Rusty crouched low, uncertain, then inched forward. The distance between them closed inch by inch. 10 feet, 5, 2. Jack could see the faint scar along Rusty's shoulder, could hear the soft hitch of his breath. When the cub finally pressed his forehead against Jack's chest, the air left his lungs in a rush. "There you are," Jack murmured, one hand sliding gently along Rusty's back. "Told you I'd come." The cub made a sound then, a raw, rasping purr that shook through both of them. The handlers turned away, pretending not to wipe their eyes. When Jack finally stood, Rusty followed, brushing against his leg. "Looks like you got yourself a job," one of the staff joked quietly. Jack laughed, still hoarse. "Guess so." In the days that followed, he learned the routines: feeding, cleaning, walking the perimeter of the enclosures. Rusty stayed near him whenever he could, a shadow of fur and fire. The other animals watched, wary but curious, as if they too sensed something unspoken. The way loss recognizes loss. At night, after the sanctuary had gone still, Jack would sit outside Rusty's pen with his guitar. The songs were softer now, less about pain, more about gratitude. Rusty would lie in the grass, eyes half closed, listening. The stars above seemed closer somehow, the air gentler. One evening Claire visited. She stood at the fence, watching them. "You did it," she said quietly. Jack smiled, brushing dirt from his hands. "No," he said. "We did." He glanced at Rusty, who was stretched out in the grass, tail flicking lazily. "He just showed me the way." Claire nodded. "What will you do now?" Jack looked up at the fading light, then back at the cub who had once been no one's. "Keep showing up," he said simply. "For him. For me." As night settled over the sanctuary, Jack picked up his guitar again. The first notes drifted into the air, carrying across the fields. Rusty lifted his head, eyes glowing in the dark. For a long while, man and Bobcat sat together beneath the quiet sky, bound not by need or pity, but by something far stronger, a promise kept. And somewhere deep inside that stillness, Jack realized that neither of them was lost anymore. Jack's new life began quietly. There were no parades, no headlines this time. Just the soft rhythm of morning light spilling through the trees and the distant calls of birds waking in the sanctuary. For the first time in years, he woke not to the sound of traffic or rain dripping through cardboard, but to calm, to peace. He lived in a small cabin near the main path. One room, one bed, one window looking out over the animal enclosures. The staff had set it up for him when he took the job, and though it was modest, it felt like the grandest place he'd ever lived. On the wall hung his guitar, polished and repaired by a volunteer who recognized him from the videos. Every morning, before the sun rose, Jack would touch the strings, just once, like saying a prayer. His work began early, cleaning enclosures, preparing meals, checking fences. Rusty followed wherever he went, sometimes from inside his pen, sometimes trailing him through the inner fields where the caretakers walked animals for exercise. The cub, though no longer a cub now, had grown into a strong, sleek young bobcat, his muscles fluid, his eyes still burning with that golden light Jack knew so well. "Look at you," Jack said one morning, crouching beside him. "All grown up. You're gonna make me look lazy." Rusty blinked slowly, the kind of look that said everything without words. Visitors often came to the sanctuary now. Families, students, donors. Most of them had seen the story online. They pointed at Rusty, whispering, "That's him. That's the bobcat from the videos." Jack was part of the story too, though he still felt strange about it. He'd never liked being seen. But when the kids pressed against the railings, eyes wide with wonder, he didn't turn away. He'd kneel down, tell them Rusty's story, how a wild heart could still learn to trust, how love could grow in the unlikeliest places. One afternoon, a teacher asked if Jack would speak to her class about kindness. He hesitated at first, hands rough and nervous, but finally agreed. When he stood before the children, he didn't talk about war or poverty or loss. He talked about Rusty. "He taught me that second chances don't come easy," Jack said, "but they come. And when they do, you hold on." The room was silent, every face fixed on him. Then a small girl raised her hand and asked, "Did he save you too?" Jack smiled, eyes glinting. "Yeah," he said softly. "Maybe more than I saved him." Outside, Rusty waited by the fence, tail flicking lazily. When Jack stepped out, the bobcat bounded toward him, brushing against his leg. The visitors gasped, charmed by the sight of a wild creature greeting a man like an old friend. That night, the staff threw a small dinner to celebrate Jack's first month at the sanctuary. Claire came too. She'd been visiting often, turning the story into a documentary that would later air nationwide. When she toasted to him, Jack lifted his glass awkwardly, embarrassed. "Don't make me famous again," he said, and everyone laughed. Later, as the others drifted away, Claire walked with him down the path toward Rusty's enclosure. The night air was cool, the stars sharp above the pines. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. Jack shook his head. "No, not anymore. Everything I lost led me here." Rusty padded close to the fence, watching them. Jack reached out, his hand brushing the wire between them. "Guess this is what home feels like," he murmured. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running from anything. He was exactly where he was meant to be. The weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of life at the sanctuary settled into something gentle, steady, almost sacred. Jack rose with the sun each day, fed the animals, repaired fences, and played his guitar for whoever wanted to listen. Though most mornings, it was only Rusty. The bobcat always seemed to know when Jack was about to play. He'd appear silently from the grass, sit a few feet away, and watch, his eyes reflecting the pale dawn light. Sometimes, when Jack finished a song, Rusty would let out a low, rumbling sound. Not quite a purr, not quite a growl, but something that felt like approval. Visitors kept coming, drawn by the story they'd seen online. Parents brought their children. Soldiers came with quiet nods of respect. Some people simply wanted to thank Jack. Others just wanted to stand there and watch, as if being near the two of them could make the world a little softer. Jack never got used to it. "I didn't do anything special," he told Claire once when she filmed a follow-up segment. "I just didn't walk away." Claire smiled behind the camera. Most people do. The short documentary she made, Rusty and Jack, A Second Chance, aired nationwide in early spring. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was quiet, full of small moments. Jack patching a fence, Rusty rubbing against his leg, the two of them sitting by the fence line in silence. But it struck something deep in people. Messages poured in again, thousands of them, veterans, single parents, kids in foster care, all saying the same thing. "Thank you for reminding us that broken doesn't mean hopeless." Jack read some of the letters aloud to Rusty in the evenings. "You hear that, buddy? You're a celebrity now." Rusty would twitch his ears, unimpressed, and roll onto his back, demanding attention. Jack chuckled. "Yeah, you're right. Fame's overrated." But not all of the attention came from afar. Some of it arrived right at the sanctuary gates. Volunteers, donors, people bringing supplies. A few even stayed to help. Jack worked beside them, quiet and patient, teaching them what he knew. How to move slow, how to earn an animal's trust, how to listen to silence without fear. The staff began to notice that something changed when he was around. The animals were calmer. The new rescues, often wild, terrified, lashing out, settled faster under his care. "You've got a gift," one of the senior caretakers told him. Jack shook his head. "No, I just know what it feels like to be scared." He started spending more time with the newcomers, foxes, owls, even another injured bobcat brought in from the mountains. Rusty watched the interactions closely, always keeping his distance but never far enough to miss what was happening. Sometimes, when Jack was tending to another animal, Rusty would call softly from across the field, a reminder of their bond that even time and freedom couldn't erase. On weekends, the sanctuary held open days where visitors could learn about wildlife rehabilitation. Jack didn't like speaking in front of crowds, but when the director asked him to share a few words, he agreed. Standing at the edge of Rusty's enclosure, he looked out at the small group before him and said, "I used to think saving someone meant keeping them close. Turns out sometimes it means letting them go, but never giving up on them." The words lingered in the air long after he finished. That night, after everyone left, Jack sat by the fence again. Rusty approached, brushing against the wire before settling down beside him. The stars shimmered above, and the sound of night creatures filled the air. Jack leaned back, his voice low. "You ever think about the fire, Rusty? How everything had to burn down before we could start over?" Rusty blinked slowly, his golden eyes reflecting the starlight. Jack smiled. "Yeah," he whispered. "Me too." He closed his eyes, listening to the quiet between them. For the first time in his life, silence didn't feel empty. It felt whole. Late that summer, the sanctuary hosted its biggest event of the year, an open day for the public, celebrating the animals that had survived, healed, and found new beginnings. For weeks, the staff prepared the grounds. Banners fluttered along the fences, picnic tables lined the paths, and families arrived in cars from towns miles away. Claire was there too, camera in hand, capturing it all for the follow-up piece she was working on. Jack stood near Rusty's enclosure, straightening a sign that read, "The Bobcat Who Found His Way Home." His hands were rough, his shirt faded, but his eyes were bright, calm in a way they hadn't been in years. Rusty prowled the edge of his space, his fur glowing bronze in the afternoon sun. When he caught sight of Jack, he stopped, gave that low, familiar sound, half purr, half growl, that only Jack seemed to understand. Throughout the day, people came up to him. Veterans, teachers, kids. They asked questions, told stories of their own rescues, thanked him for what he'd done. Jack listened quietly to each one. He never talked about himself. He only talked about Rusty, the cub who taught him to care again, the cub who turned a forgotten man into someone who mattered. In the afternoon, the director called Jack to the small wooden stage near the center of the park. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "our sanctuary exists because people believe that life deserves a second chance. No one embodies that more than this man, and the friend who never gave up on him." The applause caught Jack off guard. He stepped up slowly, adjusting his cap, his heart pounding. The microphone felt foreign in his hand. For a moment, he just looked at the crowd. So many faces, so many eyes watching. And then at Rusty, who had settled near the fence, waiting. "I don't know much about speeches," Jack began, his voice low and steady. "But I do know about losing things. I lost my home, my family. Parts of myself I didn't think I'd ever get back. And then one day I found a small, half-burned bobcat in a box behind a dumpster. Or maybe he found me. I guess it doesn't matter which." He paused, the crowd silent. We were both broken, but sometimes two broken things fit together just right. He needed warmth. I needed purpose. And somehow, that was enough. He glanced down, smiling faintly. "People call me a hero, but the truth is Rusty saved me first. He reminded me that even when the world gives up on you, life still has a way of whispering, 'Not yet.' You just have to listen." The crowd rose in quiet applause. Some were crying. Others stood holding hands. Claire filmed through tears she didn't bother to hide. Afterward, Jack returned to the fence. Rusty came to meet him, rubbing his head against the wire as if to say, "Well done." Jack chuckled softly. "What? You think you could have done better?" Rusty blinked, unamused, and Jack laughed again. "Yeah, maybe you're right." As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting the whole field in gold, Jack sat cross-legged by the enclosure and began to play his guitar. The melody floated through the warm air, rising and falling with the rhythm of the wind. Children stopped to listen. A few parents joined in, humming quietly. And for a few beautiful minutes, the sanctuary felt weightless, like every pain, every scar, every mistake had led exactly here. When the last note faded, Rusty pressed closer to the fence, his eyes catching the light. Jack reached out, his voice barely above a whisper. "We made it, partner." The bobcat blinked slowly, calm and content. Around them, the crowd lingered in silence, watching the man and the wild creature who had taught each other how to begin again. That night, after everyone left, Jack stayed outside a little longer. The stars were bright, the world quiet. He looked up and smiled, thinking of all that had burned and all that had grown back in its place. Maybe, he thought, second chances weren't given. Maybe they were found, one heartbeat at a time. Autumn came quietly to the sanctuary. The mornings grew crisp, and the air smelled of pine and rain-soaked earth. Leaves turned gold and red, falling across the dirt paths where Jack walked each day. He carried a metal pail in one hand and his guitar in the other, his steps slow but steady. Rusty followed along the fence line, his coat glowing amber in the low sunlight. It had been a year since the day they'd found each other again. The sanctuary was thriving, new enclosures built, more animals rescued, more volunteers arriving every month. Jack had become part of the place, as constant as the trees or the wind that rolled down from the hills. The staff called him the keeper with the quiet hands. He liked that. Every morning began the same. Jack would whistle softly at Rusty's pen, a sound that always brought the bobcat running from wherever he was. Rusty would greet him with a low rumble, brushing against the fence before pacing alongside him as he worked. "You keep me on schedule," Jack would joke. Rusty, as always, said nothing, though his amber eyes followed every move. Sometimes, when no one else was around, Jack opened the small side gate that led into the inner training area, a wide stretch of grass enclosed by high fencing. Rusty knew the space well. There, under Jack's careful watch, he could run freely, stretch, breathe. Jack would sit on the old wooden crate near the fence and play his guitar, slow and easy. Rusty would roll in the grass, chase shadows, then finally lie down near Jack's feet, content. Those were the moments that felt closest to peace. Two survivors sitting in silence, each understanding the other without a word. Claire still visited often. The documentary had done more than raise awareness. It had changed lives. Donations poured in from all over the country, enough to expand the sanctuary and build a new veterinary wing named the Rusty Center for Second Chances. Jack hated the name at first, but Claire insisted. "It's not just for him," she'd said. "It's for every soul that gets to start over, human or animal." One afternoon, she arrived unannounced with a camera crew. "Just one more interview," she promised. Jack groaned but agreed. They sat under a big oak tree near Rusty's enclosure while the camera rolled. "What's changed for you, Jack?" she asked. He looked out at the field, at Rusty lounging in the sun. "Everything," he said simply. "I used to think the world didn't see me, but maybe it was me who stopped looking back. Rusty, he made me pay attention again. He reminded me that being alive isn't the same as living." Claire smiled. "You think he knows how much he's done?" Jack laughed softly. "Animals don't think about meaning. They just are. They live it. Maybe that's what we're supposed to do too." As the afternoon faded, Claire packed her gear and hugged him before leaving. "You've got a good thing here, Jack," she said. "Don't forget that." He watched her drive away, the sound of gravel fading down the long road. When he turned back, Rusty was standing by the fence, staring at him. "Yeah, I know," Jack said with a grin. "We did all right." That night, the sky burned orange as the sun slipped behind the ridge. Jack sat on the porch of his cabin, strumming his guitar while Rusty paced nearby, his shadow long against the grass. The melody was slow and familiar, the same tune he'd played that first night under the bridge. But now, it sounded different. Not a song of loss, but of gratitude. When the stars came out, Jack whispered, "Guess this is home, huh?" Rusty lifted his hot head, eyes glowing in the starlight. Jack smiled, his voice barely above a breath. "Yeah, home at last." Winter returned softly, without the violence of the one before. Frost kissed the grass each morning, and the sky stayed pale for hours before the sun finally rose. Jack had grown older. There were more lines on his face, more gray in his beard. But his eyes, calm, bright, steady, had never looked more alive. Rusty was older too. He was no longer the fragile cub trembling in a box of rain. He was strong now, confident, and free inside the sanctuary's wide fields. Yet no matter how far he roamed, he always came back to Jack. Every evening, as the light faded, Jack could hear the soft padding of paws approaching his cabin. Rusty would sit beside the steps, waiting, and Jack would smile, open the door, and say the same words every night. "You're just in time, partner." They would walk the grounds together, Jack humming a tune, Rusty brushing past his leg. Sometimes the volunteers followed at a distance, phones out, filming the scene. They said the sight of the two of them felt like watching a promise kept. One evening, a little boy visiting the sanctuary ran up to Jack and asked, "Mister, is he your pet?" Jack smiled, crouching down. "No, son, he's not my pet. He's my friend, the best one I ever had." The boy nodded, thoughtful. "He looks happy." Jack's voice softened. "He is. And so am I." That night, Jack sat by the fence again, guitar resting on his knee. The moon was full, the fields silver under its light. Rusty stretched out on the other side, his eyes half closed. Jack began to play quietly, each note rising like a breath. He wasn't singing for fame or an audience now, just for the moment, for the bond that had brought him here. As he played, he spoke softly. To Rusty, to the stars, maybe to anyone who'd ever felt forgotten. "You know, when I first found you, I thought I was saving your life. But the truth is, you were saving mine. You showed me that broken things can still build something whole. You taught me that love isn't about owning, it's about showing up. Every day, even when it hurts." Rusty lifted his head, the faintest sound rumbling in his chest, and Jack smiled. "Yeah," he whispered, "I know you remember." The world around them had grown quiet. The sanctuary lights flickered gently in the distance. Somewhere inside, a new rescue, a tiny fawn, took its first unsteady steps. Life went on, and that was the point. Jack set the guitar aside and leaned back, staring up at the sky. "You think people will remember us, Rusty?" The bobcat yawned, curling his tail around himself. Jack chuckled. "Yeah, probably not. But maybe they'll remember what we stood for." He sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. The night was cold, but not unkind. Every sound, every breath felt like a heartbeat echoing from somewhere deeper than the world itself. Finally he stood, brushing the dirt from his hands. He looked at Rusty one last time before heading inside. "Come on, buddy," he said softly. "Let's go home." Rusty followed. The camera, if there were one, would linger on that image. A man and a bobcat walking side by side through the frost-lit grass, their shadows stretching long in the moonlight. A story ending, and another quietly beginning. And then, before the screen fades, Jack's voice, calm, weathered, full of warmth, speaks to the audience, breaking the silence one last time. If you believe every life deserves a second chance, if you've ever been lost and somehow found again, then stay with us. Subscribe, share, and keep these stories alive. Because sometimes, all it takes to change a life is someone who doesn't walk away.